I never thought the place I grew up would become somewhere I couldn't be myself. The house where I learned to walk, where I had my first birthday party, where my mother used to braid my hair before school. That house became a battlefield the day she asked me to come home and then told me my sexuality made her uncomfortable. I'm 31 years old now, and I can still feel the weight of those words like stones in my chest. This is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the ones who struggle the most when you finally show them who you really are. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and Sunday dinners are sacred. My mother raised me and my younger brother mostly on her own after my father left when I was 12. She worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and clothed, and I never once heard her complain. She was my hero, strong, determined, always putting us first. I grew up wanting to make her proud, to be the son she could brag about to her friends at church, to live up to the sacrifices she made. I went to college, got a degree in marketing, landed a decent job in Columbus. I dated women throughout my 20s, had a few serious relationships that never quite worked out. I told myself it was just bad timing, or that I hadn't met the right person yet. I told myself a lot of things back then. When I was 28, I met Daniel at a work conference in Cleveland. He was a graphic designer from Chicago, tall and lean with dark hair that was always slightly messy, like he'd just run his hands through it. He had this way of listening when you talked, really listening. His brown eyes focused entirely on you like nothing else in the world mattered in that moment. We were assigned to the same breakout session on digital marketing strategies, ended up sitting next to each other. He made a joke about the presenter's terrible PowerPoint design, and I laughed harder than I had in months. We got coffee after the session, then dinner, then drinks. By the end of the conference, I had his number saved in my phone, and a feeling in my stomach I couldn't quite name. We started texting every day. Just casual stuff at first, funny memes, complaints about work, recommendations for shows to watch. Then the conversations got longer, more personal. He told me about growing up in a strict Catholic family, about coming out when he was 22 and losing half his relatives in the process. I told him about my mother, about how much I wanted to make her proud, about the pressure I felt to be perfect. I didn't tell him about the way my heart sped up every time his name appeared on my phone screen. I didn't tell him about the dreams I was starting to have, dreams that left me confused and restless when I woke up. 3 months after we met, Daniel came to Columbus for a weekend. He stayed at a hotel downtown, but we spent almost every waking hour together. We went to the art museum, walked through German Village, ate at this tiny Thai restaurant that he insisted made the best pad see ew outside of Chicago. On Saturday night, we ended up back at my apartment, drinking beer on my couch and talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his ex-boyfriend, about how hard it was to trust people after being hurt. I told him about my last girlfriend, about how she'd said I was emotionally unavailable, that it felt like I was always holding something back. He looked at me for a long moment after I said that, and I felt something shift in the air between us. I started making excuses to myself. I told myself I just admired Daniel, that he was confident in ways I wasn't, that I was drawn to his authenticity. I told myself that the way I felt when we were together was just friendship, just the relief of being around someone who understood me. But late at night, alone in my bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the way his hand had brushed against mine when we were walking, about the sound of his laugh, about how badly I wanted to know what it would feel like to touch him. I compared these feelings to what I'd felt with the women I'd dated, and something inside me started to crack open. The truth was there, waiting for me to acknowledge it, but I kept pushing it down, telling myself I was just confused, that this didn't mean anything. My mother called me every Sunday like clockwork. She'd tell me about her week, about my brother's new job, about the gossip from church. She'd ask about my life, about whether I was seeing anyone. I'd learned to deflect those questions, to change the subject, to keep things vague. But after I met Daniel, something changed in my voice. She noticed. Mothers always notice. She started asking more questions, pressing harder. Was I happy? Was something wrong? Why did I sound different? I told her I was fine, that work was just stressful, that I was tired. I hated lying to her, but I didn't know how to tell her the truth when I was barely admitting it to myself. Daniel and I kept seeing each other, finding excuses to visit, to spend weekends together. 6 months in, we were at his apartment in Chicago, and I was helping him hang new artwork in his living room. He was standing on a ladder, and I was holding the frame, and he looked down at me with this soft expression that made my breath catch. He climbed down and stood in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, and he said my name so quietly, it was almost a whisper. I don't remember which one of us moved first. All I remember is the feeling of his hand on my face, the warmth of his breath, and then his lips on mine. It was gentle and terrifying and perfect, and in that moment, everything I'd been denying crashed over me like a wave. I kissed him back, and it felt like coming home to a place I'd never known existed. Afterward, I sat on his couch with my head in my hands, and he sat next to me, not touching me, just waiting. I felt like I was falling apart and coming together at the same time. I told him I didn't know what I was doing, that I'd never done this before, that I was scared. He told me it was okay, that we could take it slow, that there was no pressure. But I knew it wasn't just about him. It was about everything I'd built my life around, every assumption I'd made about who I was supposed to be. It was about my mother and her expectations and the version of me she thought she knew. I drove back to Columbus that night even though Daniel asked me to stay, and I spent the entire 3-hour drive crying so hard I had to pull over twice. I couldn't sleep for weeks. I'd lie awake replaying that kiss, feeling the guilt and the desire and the fear all tangled together. I stopped calling my mother as often. When she called me, I kept the conversation short, made excuses to get off the phone. She knew something was wrong. She always knew. One night she called and said she was worried about me, that I didn't sound like myself, that she missed me. She said she wanted me to come home for a weekend, that we needed to spend some real time together. I agreed because I missed her too, because part of me hoped that being home would make everything feel normal again, would remind me of who I was supposed to be. I drove home on a Friday afternoon in late September. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the air had that crisp quality that always made me nostalgic for childhood. My mother had made my favorite dinner, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, homemade rolls, apple pie for dessert. We ate at the kitchen table like we used to, and she told me about her week, about the new family that moved in down the street, about how my brother was thinking about proposing to his girlfriend. I listened and nodded and tried to pretend everything was fine, but I could feel her watching me, studying me, trying to figure out what was different. After dinner, we sat on the back porch with coffee, watching the sun set over the yard where I used to play as a kid. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "You're different. Something's changed." I told her I was just stressed about work, but she shook her head. She said, "I'm your mother. I know when you're lying to me." I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to tell her. Part of me desperately wanted to tell her everything, to share this huge thing that was happening to me, to have her understand. But I was terrified of what would happen if I did. She kept pushing, kept asking, and finally I said, "I've been seeing someone." She lit up immediately, asked if it was serious, asked when she could meet her, and I realized I had a choice to make right there on that porch. I could lie, could make up a woman, could keep hiding, or I could tell her the truth and risk everything. I took a breath that felt like it might break me in half, and I said, "It's not a her, Mom. It's a him. His name is Daniel." The silence that followed was the longest of my life. I watched her face change, watched her smile fade, watched her pull back from me like I'd physically pushed her. She stood up, walked to the edge of the porch, stood there with her back to me. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight and controlled. She said, "I don't understand. You've dated women. You've had girlfriends. When did this happen?" I tried to explain that I was figuring things out, that this was new for me too, that I was still the same person. She turned around and looked at me like she didn't recognize me. She said, "How could you do this to me? After everything I've sacrificed for you." I felt like I'd been slapped. I tried to tell her this wasn't about her, that this was about me and who I was. But she wasn't listening. She said she needed time to process this, that she couldn't talk about it right now. We went inside, and the rest of the evening was excruciating. We moved around each other like strangers, the easy warmth from dinner completely gone. I went to bed in my childhood room, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was 13 years old again and in trouble for something I couldn't control. The next morning, she made breakfast like always, but we barely spoke. I could see her struggling, could see her trying to act normal and failing. After breakfast, she asked me to sit down at the kitchen table. She sat across from me, her hands folded in front of her, and she said, "I've been thinking about this all night. I want you to know I love you. You're my son, and that will never change." I felt a tiny spark of hope, but then she continued. She said, "But I need to be honest with you. Your sexuality makes me uncomfortable. I don't understand it, and I don't know if I ever will. I think it would be better if you didn't bring it up when you're here. If you're going to live that lifestyle, that's your choice, but I don't want to hear about it." The words hit me like physical blows. She wasn't rejecting me entirely, but she was asking me to hide, to pretend, to cut off the part of myself that was finally starting to feel real and true. She was saying she loved me conditionally, only if I kept the most important part of myself locked away. I sat there feeling like I was shrinking, like I was disappearing right there at her kitchen table. I wanted to argue, to make her understand, but I could see in her eyes that she'd already made up her mind. She'd drawn her line and I was on the wrong side of it. I left that afternoon instead of staying the whole weekend like I'd planned. I told her I had work stuff to handle, and she didn't fight me on it. She hugged me goodbye, but it felt stiff and formal, nothing like the warm embraces I'd known my whole life. I drove back to Columbus with tears streaming down my face, feeling like I'd lost something irreplaceable. I called Daniel from the road, and he talked to me the whole way home, his voice steady and calm, telling me it was going to be okay, that I was brave, that he was proud of me even if my mother wasn't. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. My mother and I still talked, but the conversations were surface level and careful. She never asked about Daniel. She never asked how I was really doing. It felt like we were performing a relationship instead of having one. I grieved for the closeness we'd had, for the easy intimacy of those Sunday phone calls, for the feeling of being fully known and fully loved. I talked to my brother about it, and he was supportive but didn't know how to help. He said Mom would come around eventually, that she just needed time, but I wasn't sure I believed him. Daniel was patient with me through all of it. He never pressured me, never made me feel like I had to choose between him and my family. He just held me when I needed to be held and gave me space when I needed to think. Being with him felt right in a way nothing else in my life ever had. With him, I didn't have to pretend or perform or hide. I could just be myself, messy and confused, and still figuring things out. I started to understand that this was what I'd been missing in all those relationships with women. This feeling of being completely seen and completely accepted. I came out to a few close friends, and their reactions were overwhelmingly positive. They told me they were happy for me, that they could see the change in me, that I seemed lighter somehow. One of my college friends said, "I always wondered if you were holding something back. Now I know what it was." It felt good, to be honest, to stop carrying around this secret that had been weighing me down. But it also highlighted how much it hurt that my mother couldn't be happy for me the way my friends were. 6 months after that terrible weekend, my mother called me on a Tuesday night. It wasn't our usual Sunday call, and my heart started racing as soon as I saw her name on my screen. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, that she'd talked to her pastor and to some friends. She said she was trying to understand, but it was hard for her. She asked if we could talk, really talk, not just the surface-level conversations we'd been having. I agreed, even though I was terrified of what she might say. We met at a coffee shop halfway between Columbus and my hometown, neutral territory. She looked tired when she walked in, older than I remembered. We sat down with our coffee, and for a minute neither of us said anything. Then she said, "I've been a bad mother." I started to protest, but she held up her hand. She said, "Let me finish. I've been so focused on my own discomfort, on my own feelings about this, that I forgot to think about what you must be going through. You're my son. You came to me with something huge, something that must have been terrifying to share, and I made it about me. I'm sorry." I felt tears welling up, but I held them back. She continued. She said she'd been raised to believe certain things about sexuality, about what was right and wrong, and those beliefs were hard to shake even when they conflicted with her love for me. She said she was trying to unlearn some of that, to see things differently, but it was a process. She asked about Daniel, really asked, wanted to know how we met and what he was like and whether I was happy. I told her everything, and she listened without interrupting, without flinching. When I finished, she said, "I want to meet him. If he's important to you, then he's important to me." It wasn't a complete transformation. She still struggled sometimes, still said things that stung, still had moments where I could see her wrestling with her discomfort. But she was trying, and that meant everything. She met Daniel a month later, and I watched her make an effort to be welcoming, to ask him questions, to include him in the conversation. It was awkward at times, but it was real. After he left, she hugged me and said, "I can see why you love him. He's good for you." It wasn't quite acceptance, but it was closer than I'd thought we'd ever get. My relationship with my mother is still a work in progress. Some days are better than others. She still doesn't bring up my sexuality unless I do first, and I know she struggles with it more than she lets on. But she's trying, and I'm learning that sometimes that's all you can ask for. She calls me on Sundays again, and the conversations feel more real, more honest. She asks about Daniel now, remembers details about his life, sends him a card on his birthday. It's not perfect, but it's something. I think about that weekend a lot, about sitting on her porch and making the choice to tell her the truth. Part of me wishes I'd handled it differently, wishes I'd been more prepared, wishes I'd known what to say to make her understand. But another part of me knows that there was no perfect way to do it, no magic words that would have made it easy. Coming out is messy and complicated and painful, especially when it's to someone whose opinion matters so much. I had to accept that I couldn't control her reaction, couldn't make her feel differently than she felt. All I could do was be honest and hope that eventually, love would be stronger than discomfort. I'm 31 years old now, and I'm still learning who I am. I'm learning that sexuality isn't always straightforward, that sometimes you don't figure it out until later in life, and that's okay. I'm learning that being authentic is worth the risk, even when it costs you relationships or comfort, or the version of yourself you thought you were supposed to be. I'm learning that the people who truly love you will find a way to accept you, even if it takes time, even if it's hard. And I'm learning that I deserve to be loved for who I actually am, not for who I'm pretending to be. Daniel and I are still together. We talk about the future sometimes, about maybe moving in together, about what our life could look like. It's terrifying and exciting in equal measure. I never imagined this for myself, never pictured being with a man, building a life with someone like him. But now that I'm here, I can't imagine anything else. He knows all of me, the scared parts, the confused parts, the parts that are still figuring things out, and he loves me anyway. That's what I'd been missing all those years with women, that feeling of being completely known and completely loved. My mother asked me last month if Daniel and I were serious, if we were thinking long-term. I said yes, and she nodded slowly. She said, "Then I guess I need to get used to the idea of you two together." It wasn't exactly a blessing, but it wasn't rejection either. It was her way of saying she was still trying, still working on it. That's all I can ask for right now. Maybe someday she'll be fully comfortable with it. Maybe she won't. Either way, I know now that I can't live my life trying to make her comfortable at the expense of my own truth. If you're listening to this and you recognize something in my story, if you've ever felt like you had to hide parts of yourself to keep the people you love happy, I want you to know you're not alone. It's one of the hardest things in the world to choose authenticity when it might cost you relationships that matter. But I promise you, living a lie is harder. Pretending to be someone you're not, hiding the parts of yourself that feel most real, that's a weight that gets heavier every day you carry it. I carried it for years before I even realized what it was, and when I finally put it down, I could breathe again. My truth set me free, even when it was painful, even when it cost me the easy relationship I had with my mother. Because the truth is, that relationship wasn't real. It was based on a version of me that didn't exist, on assumptions and expectations that I couldn't live up to. The relationship we're building now is harder, more complicated, but it's real. She knows who I actually am now, not who she thought I was. And even though it's uncomfortable for her, even though she struggles with it, we're not lying to each other anymore. That has to count for something. If this story touched you in any way, if it felt familiar, or brought up feelings you've been sitting with, leave a like. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. Stories about people figuring out who they are and finding the courage to be honest about it. And if you want, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Or just write, "My truth set me free." You're not alone in this. Whatever you're going through, whatever you're questioning or discovering or struggling with, there are others who understand. Authenticity is the way forward, even when the path is hard. Especially when the path is hard. You deserve to be loved for who you actually are. We all do.